Good afternoon and welcome to today's IWC's Urgent Communications webinar, What's Next for Utilities Communication? I'm Donnie Jackson, editor for IWC's Urgent Communications. To start off, I'd like to thank Avtec, our sponsor for today's webinar. Avtec provides pure IP dispatch solutions for the utilities industry. To learn more about migration to a digital console environment, visit scout.avtec.com/utilities. I would like to remind everyone that if you are having any technical difficulties, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. For audio or slide advancement problems, try hitting the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your webinar console. Use the Command and R keys if you are on an Apple computer. You will notice a toolbar at the bottom of your console. These widgets allow you to open and close widgets on your screen. For example, if you need to adjust your volume, click on the media player widget. When you're done, click on it again to hide the media player window. And feel free to customize your webcast console. You can move windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize your windows by clicking on the lower right corner of any window. We welcome your questions about our topic. This is a big deal. We want you all to be inquisitive. To submit a question, simply type it into the question window on the left-hand side of your console and hit the Submit button. We'll be answering as many of these questions as possible during the Q&A period, but please feel free to send in your questions at any time and we'll add them to the queue. Finally, please be aware that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the IWC Urgent Communications website, urgentcom.com. You will be alerted by email once this archive has been posted. And now, I'd like to introduce today's terrific panelists. Wendell Little, IT Communications Operations Department Manager for ConEd in New York. Brett Kilbourne, Vice President of Government and Industry Affairs and Deputy General Counsel for UTC, and Morgan O'Brien, Vice Chairman of Pacific Data Vision. Be sure to check out the speaker bio widget on your console toolbar for further information on our speakers. Now let's get this underway. Wendell, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Wendell Little. I work in the IT department of Consolidated Edison Company of New York, and I'm responsible, along with my technicians, analysts, engineers, who I see in full attendance. Thanks a lot for your support, guys. We're responsible for the operations and maintenance of the corporate communication systems, which includes our fiber optic plants, ConEd, DWDM systems, and also the design and implementation of the wide area wireless systems used at ConEd. Hopefully I could keep your attention for the next 15 minutes and tell you a little bit about our company and the experiences we've had with wireless systems deployment and operations over the past decade, and to share some of our thoughts about future directions and opportunities. First, Consolidated Edison Company of New York provides electric, gas, and steam service to about 4.5 million customers in New York City and Westchester County. Population about 10 million folks, and a service territory of 660 square miles. The parent company, ConEd Inc., is one of the largest investor-owned utilities in the United States, with approximately $12 billion in annual revenues and $41 billion in assets. To cover those 660 square miles, we employ the use of various radio systems, basically divided between voice and data applications. Our voice system is a 23-site, 800 megahertz radio system built on Motorola's iDEN technology. It supports about 2,500 subscribers, and these subscribers are mainly operations folks, operations employees who work on a daily basis, communicate within groups among each other, and between them and the control centers who dispatch and control and manage the work. And it's used by our electric, gas, and steam business unit. We also have a two-site 450 megahertz motor turbo system, another Motorola system that serves about 120 users, and this is used exclusively by the folks in substations to support their switching operations, single-man switching operations. It also serves as a communication system of last resort to our generation stations, just in case for some reason every wired and every other wireless system goes down. The most interesting thing about this system is that it has a man-down feature, which alerts the control center operators in the event that somebody gets injured while switching and falls unconscious. We also have some data systems. The mainstay is our 220 900 megahertz multiple address system. It's a 30-site system throughout our service territory, and it's used primarily for SCADA applications, mostly to communicate with, remotely monitor and control our overhead switches in our service territory. I would say the population there is probably around 3,000 endpoints now. We also have a 7-site 900 megahertz unlicensed system built on a Silver Springs network technology, and that is deployed in one particular area of our service territory, and that was part of our smart grid efforts and implementation. We also depend a lot on the wireless carriers, particularly Verizon Wireless, to supplement our communications both on the voice end and on the data end. And we've deployed an architecture based on private IPs that can't be routed on the internet to further enhance the security for our data communications over public carriers. I would say probably a decade and a half ago, ConEd has made the decision to move from an analog wireless communications platform to a digital platform. The planning and design started somewhere back in 1999, which predates my association with the department, and ended somewhere around mid-2000. The IDEN system that I described early on was deployed in the 2000 to 2001 time frame. It replaced the old SmartNet trunk radio system, which was analog, with brand new digitally enhanced network designed and built by Motorola. Some of the considerations, no one likes to move, or this was basically a watershed moment. It was a paradigm shift for us because we were moving from a very simple, very easy to maintain, very easy to understand analog system that didn't require any specialized skill set, to a system that basically demanded a whole lot more in terms of operations and maintenance. And some of the drivers to make that move included coverage concerns, capacity, quality, dispatch, features, and convenience. I know convenience is the odd one out, but I'll explain why it's listed among the other more familiar technical considerations. With coverage, we had a 7-site trunk-in system. The problem with that is that there were basically 7 different systems, and the coverage didn't overlap very well. So there were a lot of challenges to cover the entire service territory in a nice, seamless fashion. There were a lot of areas where we experienced poor coverage, and other areas where we had outright coverage holes. On the capacity side, the analog system provided one talk path per frequency pair that we had, and we found that by moving to a digital technology, particularly IDEN technology, we were able to pack 6 talk paths into a single channel, which greatly improved our spectral efficiency and the utilization of that asset. In terms of quality, I was an intern, a summer intern back in the early 90s here at ConEd, and I actually used the old system, and the voice was choppy, the quality was variable, and once we moved to the ident system, it was a whole lot more stable, and the communication was a whole lot more understandable. I would say that we went from something like a DAC 2 or 3, and when I say DAC, I mean digital audio quality, so I would say DAC 3 to 4, and you know, with really good coverage even up to a DAC 5, where it's almost impossible to tell the difference between the wired and the wireless system while using the interconnect. On the dispatch side of things, the old system, it was basically, you know, mainly based on consulates, and there was a lot of use of handheld portables indoors. Once we went on to the new digital platform, we were able to implement a full-blown Centrocom console system, but which was based on TDM technology. Where features were concerned, on the analog system, there were very few talk groups, and you know, we worked within the limitations. Only folks that actually work groups that actually needed talk groups were assigned, and they were assigned in a more broad fashion. There was basically, I would say, not that there wasn't a private mode, but it wasn't used very much on the analog system. Once we moved to the digital system, it expanded the number of talk groups that we had available to 255. The private point-to-point was a really big hit with the work crews. And there was a lot better mix of interconnect, which is to say phone call, cell phone type traffic, and push-to-talk communications. We were able to maintain our emergency button. Okay, this is a feature whereby, you know, our crews could press the button and it would send a distress signal to the control centers. And overall, once we moved on to digital platform, we had a better suite of products altogether, you know, from portables to accessories to mobiles. On the convenience front, our crews no longer had to manually switch from one analog system to the other analog system as they moved throughout our service territory and moved on to different systems. So the move from analog to digital, you know, afforded us huge improvement that made our work processes a whole lot more easy and a whole lot streamlined. Looking back, how did it work out? I could tell you it's great owning your own radio systems. We were able to harden sites as we see fit, you know, implement things like dual backhaul, you know, really robust backup power. What was great is that we could restore our systems on a priority basis, and we were the only users, so we could basically control congestion, and we had the highest priority. I think it was a really good move, and it was a really good investment. Okay, borne out by, I would say, the performance in 3 major incidents that we had experienced in that time frame. The first one was the blackout, the Northeast blackout in 2003. Our system stayed up. Same was the case during Hurricane Irene, and most recently during Hurricane Sandy. I can tell you it was really very advantageous and refreshing to know that the day after the storms had subsided, we had a communication system that was ready and available to support the restoration by the field crews and all the other crews that would come in to help Con Edison during Irene almost immediately. We able to maintain 8 hours backup battery at sites where we have generators, and we use 16 hours backup battery at sites where we need to deploy a portable generator. Some of the things that we've learned, you know, over the years operating our private systems is that wireless spectrum is really a critical asset. I don't think anybody could have foreseen the explosion in wireless, particularly commercialization wireless. And what that did is it had a secondary impact on people like us, critical infrastructure companies that basically use wireless communications. Back then it was called radio, back in the 40s and 50s, because we needed to. And what we would usually be able to apply for and pay a very nominal, small FCC filing fee and get the spectrum. Now we found that the spectrum was not available, and we sort of like had to take our first steps into an auction back in 2005. I would say that we paid at least 2 orders of magnitude more than what we were accustomed to paying through the normal FCC filing process, because we found ourselves, bidding against prospectors and folks with really very deep pockets. Frequency planning and spectral efficiency on a digital system is really a key point in the design. It's something that shouldn't be overlooked. Digital systems are a whole lot less forgiving than analog systems in terms of optimization on the RF or the air interface. And the other area that we learned a lot was spectrum transactions. We always thought that it was necessary and absolutely required that we own spectrum, but because of the demand, we've gone into more leasing spectrum. In fact, that might be the only way we would probably get into the broadband area. I would say that moving to the digital technology was the right move, and particularly given the spectrum constraints that had developed in the time that right after we had moved to digital technology. What's next for us? We are really very open to all opportunities out there. We looking at our narrowband strategy. We have an ident system that continues to work really very well for us and meet our needs where voice is concerned. But there are really good options out there, including P25, Tetra, DMR. We have some experience with the motor turbo system, which we like, and I had the opportunity to take a look at Andy Schwartz's Tetra system, which is also really pretty impressive. We remain open and plugged into the FirstNet efforts where broadband 700 megahertz is concerned. If we had broadband spectrum, we probably would build our LTE network, basically just to meet the demand that we see where smart grid and automation is concerned. And we look forward to LTE over voice, because we think that the best place to be is to have a single network that could handle all wireless needs and basically hone all your resources to maintaining and operating that system. We think that carriers will continue to play a big part in meeting our wireless communications needs, and we look forward to the day when they would sort of like share our philosophy on resiliency and hardening sites and things like that. So thank you for your attention. That is basically our story. Hopefully it would have been a little bit helpful and a little bit instructive in folks who basically at that point where they need to make that decision to move from analog to digital, and particularly moving into voice over IP. We've done a lot of work in moving from the old TDM type telephone system to the voice over IP network, and we've deployed the Avtec system to basically put us on an IP platform for dispatch so that we could speak seamlessly between the two platforms. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Wendell, thank you very much for that information. Great stuff. You mentioned about the fact that you all are looking at different things moving forward. Everything from different digital LMR stuff all the way to carrier type technology like LTE. Are you all confident that your dispatch system is going to be able to work no matter which way you go in the future?
Right, yes, and this was one of the considerations in upgrading our dispatch system. We think that some of the things that we've done will future-proof us to some extent where that is concerned. We have had some success in actually demonstrating that because we've been able to integrate or interface the Avtec system with our IDEN system and also with one of the major carriers here, which act as a backup for us. We continue to work with Avtec on looking at opportunities to interface with other carrier systems, and we think we have some level of commitment from them regarding future systems, and particularly something like LTE.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Wendell. Brett, I wanted to turn to you. Wendell mentioned the fact of the never-ending search for spectrum. Tell us, what are some of the opportunities out there for utilities? What are some of the options?
Sure. Thanks, Donnie, and thanks to the folks at IWC for the opportunity for me to tell the UTC story in terms of what's new. UTC's primary focus is to try to gain access to licensed spectrum that will support the kind of reliability and resiliency that Wendell was referring to, so that utility communications are highly reliable and support the safe and efficient delivery of electric and water and other services to the public at large. So I didn't do any slides, but I do want to talk through a couple of different opportunities that we're looking at and where they currently stand. I think we've actually turned the corner in terms of the opportunity for access to spectrum that's going to be capable of supporting the increased capacity and coverage requirements the utility companies are facing when it comes to smart grid and other applications. What we're probably looking at as a practical matter at this point is, at least in the near term, is sharing spectrum, looking at the 700 megahertz public safety broadband network as one potential opportunity, and closely related to that, the Commission's got a proceeding where they're looking at possibly opening up the 4.9 gigahertz band to be eligible for critical infrastructure entities, generally including utility companies. So just in terms of new news on the 700 megahertz front, FirstNet put out a public notice, and comments are due October 27th. One of the proposals or preliminary conclusions by FirstNet in its public notice was with respect to entities that are eligible for access to the 700 megahertz network. FirstNet looked at its statutory authority and has proposed that the eligibility could be expanded beyond just your traditional public safety folks, such as police, fire and rescue, to also include other entities that come within the second part of the Spectrum Act in terms of the Homeland Security Act, looking at emergency responders. And under those folks, FirstNet is concluded that as long as other entities that provide public safety services in a non-de minimis capacity, those entities can also be eligible to be public safety users of the network. And in that context, FirstNet specifically mentioned utility companies. So we filed comments jointly with the Edison Electric Institute. There were 65 comments that were filed by various different parties. I would say roughly a third of those were by utility companies and also equipment manufacturers as well as several public safety entities also that filed in support of FirstNet's preliminary conclusion that utility companies should have access to the network as public safety entities. So I thought we got very good support in this stage of the process. I'm hoping that FirstNet heard that loud and clear, because it's important. To Wendell's point, utility companies need priority access on the network. By virtue of us being eligible as public safety entities, that would improve our chances to receive priority access on the network so that mission-critical communications that utility companies use, such as SCADA, such as distributed automation, communication applications that support reliable electricity, those mission-critical communications would continue to receive priority access on the 700 megahertz network even during emergencies. So that's a very important point. And while there are other issues that were taken up in this public notice, and we did address those issues, the eligibility issue and the priority access issue are going to be key for utility companies in terms of moving forward and trying to share this network and become partners with public safety to build a network, which is important. From a FirstNet standpoint, it provides a greater base of end users in the form of utility companies that would basically form the anchor tenants to the PSPN. And then also, we can contribute a lot of resources in terms of infrastructure access, millions of poles, hundreds of towers, backhaul facilities as well. All that is going to help underwrite the cost of this very complex and massive undertaking, which, quite frankly, the $7 billion that they have available right now is not going to be enough to fund the entire network. So that's one opportunity, and one that, like I said, I think we've turned the corner on this in the sense that the priority access issue seems to be coming into clear focus. 4.9 gigahertz, we expect that the FCC is going to be releasing a decision on that proceeding sometime by the end of the year. We're talking about 50 megahertz of spectrum. This is spectrum that's currently allocated to public safety, but like I said before, the FCC is considering expanding eligibility to include critical infrastructure. UTC participated in a band plan with the NIPSTIC, which is a public safety group, primarily engineering group. And under this proposed band plan that was submitted to the FCC, critical infrastructure entities would have direct access to license 10 megahertz of frequencies in the 50 megahertz of spectrum. And then the remainder of the 50 megahertz of spectrum would also be subject to licensing by utilities, just subject to a 30-day waiting period, during which time any public safety entities could, submit an application to the FCC indicating that they would like to either join with the utility company in building out the network or to file their own application, just simply build out their own network. So good news is it looks like the FCC is going to be acting on that, and also that we've got a band plan that I think will be suitable for utility companies, not just in the near term in terms of the 10 megahertz of spectrum, but also in the long term, because ultimately after 3 years, any kind of waiting period would sunset, and the utility companies would be able to license all 50 megahertz of the spectrum, or any channel in the 50 megahertz of spectrum for their own as well as public safety use. So that's another opportunity that looks pretty good. UTC and utility companies are looking at all options. So there are other options that we're looking at, not just in terms of spectrum that's currently available either on a shared basis or on a Part 90 basis, but also we're looking at spectrum on the secondary market. So there's a nationwide block of 2 megahertz of spectrum in the 700 megahertz band. This is the 700 megahertz A block, which, interestingly enough, is also adjacent to the 700 megahertz public safety broadband spectrum. We've been approached by the licensees that hold all those spectrum blocks across the country. They are interested in selling that spectrum to utility companies. That's something we're evaluating at this point and discussing with the other utility companies in terms of a potential business model for going forward. But that's another indication of the fact that utility companies are looking for all options going forward. One of the things that is driving this discussion is some interesting decisions that have come out recently from the SEC. I'll talk first about a decision that came out over a year ago involving a company called Progeny. This is a licensee of spectrum in the 900 megahertz band that was purchased the spectrum at auction years ago for location monitoring services, LMS. In the interim, basically after LMS was auctioned, along came GPS, and LMS became somewhat obsolete. Progeny has now come up with a technical solution that would be able to support 911 location accuracy, which the Commission, the FCC, is looking to try and find a solution for. It's a very important issue for the FCC, as well as for public safety, to be able to locate folks that are in trouble within buildings more accurately so that emergency rescue personnel can find them more quickly. Long story short, despite concerns that UTC and other utility companies raised about the potential for Progeny operations in the 900 megahertz band to cause interference to smart meters that operated on a license basis in the 902 to 928 bands, the Commission basically authorized Progeny to deploy commercially. Now, that has not necessarily, as a practical matter, occurred on a widespread basis yet. So we have not seen thus far as much interference as we're worried about, but nonetheless, we are concerned about that in the long term. Now, that has, certainly caught the attention of senior execs within utility companies because we've got millions of smart meters that have been deployed in the 902 to 928 bands, and if they're suddenly at risk of interference, that has the potential of, stranding a lot of investments that's been made at the very least, not to mention possibly impairing utility communications, not just in terms of the meters, but also SCADA devices, too, that operate at 902 to 928. So that was the first decision that came out of the SEC that really escalated the need for licensed spectrum. The second one that just came out not too long ago, actually it's the second decision in the same hearing, involves a company called Maritime Communications Land Mobile, MCLM. And the utility companies went out to try and acquire spectrum from MCLM on the secondary market. Ultimately, there was a challenge to MCLM's license qualifications. A hearing was ordered by the FCC to assess that, and utility companies that were just trying to buy the spectrum from MCLM basically got tied up in this hearing, and they continue to be tied up in it for about 4 to 5 years. They've been stuck in this hearing. The FCC responded to requests for reconsideration from utility companies seeking to be removed from this hearing. It just came out with a decision September 11th, and basically denied relief to the utility companies that sought to be removed from the hearing. But strangely enough, granted almost exactly the same relief to a railroad company that sought to be removed from the hearing. And the FCC's rationale for doing this was that, they looked at the applications that the railroad companies were going to be using the spectrum for, decided that they were more public safety than the applications that the utility companies were going to be using it for. And, the FCC went out of its way to basically saying that SCADA applications and also other applications for smart grid were not necessarily public safety. So that has escalated this issue again for utility companies and has put more resources behind utility companies going after access to spectrum. So long story short, one of the things that just most recently happened as a result of that decision is that NARIC has now adopted a resolution for consideration at its next meeting that would, in response to the MCLM decision, show NARIC support for utility access to spectrum. And that is really the newest of the new news. I would say, just to set the stage for Morgan, in addition to the frequency bands that we have discussed earlier in terms of potential opportunities, we're also looking at 900 megahertz and also 3.5 gigahertz as other opportunities, and also access to federal spectrum that may be available as well. Stay tuned about that. We'll have more details as they become available, and I will turn it over to Morgan to talk about 900 megahertz.
Thanks a bunch, Brett. That was great. Morgan?
Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Morgan O'Brien, and I am the Vice Chairman of Pacific Data Vision. And relevant to this discussion, Pacific Data Vision in September of this year was granted FCC approval for acquisition of significant spectrum that had, over the years, been accumulated by Nextel and then Sprint after the merger of those two companies, and used intensively in the IDEN network. So since the IDEN network has been shut down, Sprint made the decision to sell the 900 megahertz licenses, and Pacific Data Vision bought them. Pacific Data Vision has been in business right around 15 years in producing applications to enhance mobile workforce. And so when these licenses became available, we made the decision to raise capital in the on Wall Street and acquire the licenses for two purposes. One of the purposes was to immediately deploy these frequencies, which are narrowband frequencies, in a dispatch market, starting in some of the top markets in the United States. And I would anticipate we would have the first of our markets operational by the first quarter of 2015. So that was the first and immediate objective, was to begin to construct facilities to provide dispatch services on technology that would be focused on push-to-talk voice quality and reliability and efficiency, and to add to that some of the feature functionality that has been developed by PDV over the years to enhance the dispatch experience. So we refer to it as sort of Dispatch Plus. So in the interest of time, I won't go into much more detail on that, but I will say that we took on two obligations when we acquired these frequencies. We took on an obligation to the investors who made available the capital to us to be able to buy them. And we also took on an obligation which we think all licensees share, which is to use our spectrum in the most efficient way possible, because as we all know, and it's been a theme underlying all these discussions, spectrum is very scarce, particularly spectrum which is in sort of the optimum place on the spectrum band for mobile communications. So this spectrum is right below 1 gigahertz, and that's sort of the sweet spot of these bands. So with those two obligations, the obligation to use our spectrum as efficiently as possible and our obligation to maximize the value of the asset that we acquired for our investors, we have been working with, and we've had the privilege of working with UTC for well over a year, as well as American Petroleum Institute and Enterprise Wireless Association, to discuss the possibility of taking the 900 megahertz channels, where we are now by far the largest licensee nationally, and working with the members of UTC, API, and EWA, who represent many of the incumbents, the other incumbents at 900, to see if there was a way in which we could take the 10 megahertz at 900. It's a block of 5 by 5, and repurpose it and realign it, recognizing that 900 megahertz is central to the licensees who are using it, and the larger the licensee, the larger the number of channels, the more important the operations. We recognize that we need to provide incentives to make that process make sense for everybody. So the concept we have is to take 60% of the spectrum 3 by 3, which roughly equates to the amount of licenses we have, and retune the frequencies so that we move to one end of the spectrum a block of 3 by 3 for broadband, and at the other end 2 by 2 megahertz for narrowband, as you can see on this chart. What we need to point out is that the way the frequencies were made available back in the 1980s and the way they have been operated ever since is narrowband and interleaved, which means that of a group of 40 blocks of 10 channels, the channels are every 10 channels, every block moves from a one type of use for SMR to the other type of use, which is business ILT. And within, all of the frequencies are interleaved, so they cannot be used for broadband. So the upshot of this is that, as we currently anticipate, we'll be filing Pacific Data Vision alongside Enterprise Wireless Association, and we're hoping others, such as UTC, but we have no guarantees, will file a petition suggesting this to the Commission, and as the rationale, the underlying rationale for this is to provide a place in the optimum frequency bands where critical infrastructure could be guaranteed access to broadband, and most importantly of all, guaranteed priority access, priority number 1 on that spectrum. So the proposition is that were this proceeding to come to a good conclusion from our standpoint, this would be the one and only place in the spectrum where a private operator, such as ourselves, can make available spectrum and facilities to utilities and other critical infrastructure players to get all the capabilities of broadband and also to get priority access guaranteed in the rules. So the concept is we will work through, as the moving party in a situation like this, we would pay the incidental costs involved in the retuning, but it would simply be swapping channels around. Nobody in this process has to lose channels. And the upshot would be for UTC and other critical infrastructure players the opportunity to sit with PVV or whoever else has the broadband license and negotiate, as what we describe as a build-to-suit structure and system to enhance utility operations. Two quick points. One is that we could spend probably the whole hour of this talking about where broadband is going globally, particularly driven by LTE. But for my purposes, I think it's sufficient to say never in history has there been a broadband, a single global technology, which literally the world is adopting. The reason that is so important for this conversation is that the feature functionality of LTE, which is the dominant broadband technology in this generation, that technology with all its performance characteristics and superiority is also being driven by unprecedented global numbers and scope, so that literally within a year or two there will be billions, that's with a B, billions of devices, and that scale is driving price down even as performance improves. So we are absolutely persuaded that in today's world, narrowband spectrum holds the development of technology back. Narrowband spectrum, which certainly has its place in some operations today, over time does not have the efficiency of broadband, and therefore there's a natural bias, we believe, at the FCC in favor of taking reasonable steps to move spectrum away from narrowband only or interleaved and moving it into broadband. Because, of course, the obvious point is if you have broadband spectrum, you can continue to operate narrowband, but with narrowband interleaved spectrum, you can't operate broadband, so it's much more limiting. And I guess the second point is, I listened to Wendell as he explained the great advantages of the way ConEd deployed their network, where they had so many elements of control, and the superiority that had over any type of relationship with a commercial operator. Well, it's those advantages that we're trying to secure for critical infrastructure, and of the critical infrastructure players, utilities represent the largest group. So we're talking about build-to-suit arrangements that divide up the control element and the risk factors and the security design so that it is much more the character of a private system than a commercial system. And as we like to say, and then I'll end this portion, today the utilities industry has a number of choices for how they might want to pursue broadband, and hopefully working with FirstNet becomes one of those. That certainly, I think, would be a great outcome. But in the meantime, what we're proposing is taking existing spectrum that all of us already own, going through a relatively simple process at the FCC, a relatively simple process in the field with retuning, and then end up with another choice. Everybody, I think, always gets the advantage if they have an additional choice. So it may not be the choice for everybody, but we think that UTC has made a compelling case over the years at the FCC for why broadband has to be in the future of critical infrastructure players. It's just that the FCC really couldn't respond to that favorably even if they wanted to, because the Congress is so clear about the need for spectrum when it becomes available, which is rare, but for when it becomes available, auctioning it off. And when it's auctioned off, the Commission, of course, makes it available to as many players as possible to drive up the price. And at that point, the very biggest carriers come in and typically they take the spectrum, particularly if it's below 1 gig. So another choice for critical infrastructure, build-to-suit, market-by-market decisions is what we're looking for, and we value this opportunity as we have the other opportunities we've been given to explain this to those who could be interested. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Morgan. You were talking about some of the different arrangements that you all might be considering. Would you all consider something that's as straightforward as a utility coming to you and saying, hey, we really need your spectrum, but we'd like to build it out ourselves?
Answer, yes. We've had those discussions.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to jump into the Q&A portion. Want to encourage everyone, if you have questions of any of our speakers, please submit them. We have a few, and we'll be jumping into those right now. And meanwhile, while our presenters are answering your questions, please take a moment to answer the survey that's available as a widget at the bottom of your screen. And then in terms of some of the questions we have, Brett, have a question from the audience. What about 3.65 gigahertz?
Yep, 365 is being impacted potentially by the FCC's proceeding in the 3.5 band. So the Commission is proposing to consolidate the 100 megahertz at 3.5 with the 50 megahertz at 365. We have a number of incumbent utility systems at 365. We're concerned about what the potential impact would be on those incumbent systems, and also we want to try and see if we can provide opportunities for other utility companies to be able to utilize that spectrum for similar utility smart grid applications. So we filed comments with the FCC expressing our concerns. One of the major concerns is that if they were to merge the two bands together, that the new Part 94 emission limits would result in reduced power for some of these incumbent operations. What we've talked about with the FCC is a possible solution where the status quo power limits would be maintained, and that would address some of our concerns. But we still have other issues we have to work through, and we're working through those issues with the Commission as we speak.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Morgan, I have a question. Without the economies of scale associated with FirstNet or a commercial wireless operator, won't the cost proposition of subscriber equipment at 900 megahertz be too high?
Here's the best way I think of answering that. We're not proposing, because if we're successful, we would have 6 megahertz 3x3. We're not proposing that that's adequate spectrum to support a large nationwide build-out. What we envision instead is working with one or more critical infrastructure, what we like to think of as anchor tenants in an area, constructing facilities, sharing as much as possible existing towers, backhaul, whatever, putting in the lowest possible cost LTE deployment. And since we would not be deploying it in a situation where we have to look backwards to existing uses, like the commercial carriers, we can look forward to the sort of latest developments in LTE. But in doing that, we would cover only those areas so important for priority access, non-preemptible service, that the cost of those facilities would support the build-out, and then outside those areas, those core areas, partner with one or more commercial carriers so that the devices that we put into the marketplace operate seamlessly through those two types of coverage. They of course, go to the priority access owned and operated facilities first, but then when they move out past the area where the economics no longer make sense, they just roam onto another system. So that's the concept of what we would do, that we would be built to suit. A second point is, and I think this is obvious, but sometimes it's a little difficult to describe it, we can give priority access to one or more critical infrastructure players in a market, but having done that, we can also sell underneath that to basically any other potential customer of broadband services, but not give them priority access. So it helps significantly address the operating expenses. It's an expensive network to build, and it's an expensive network to operate, but it would be that would be a way in which some of those costs would be somewhat offset.
Okay. Right. We also, Morgan, another question for you. When would you hope the FCC would act on your petition?
We are doing everything we can, as Brett will testify, to get industry consensus on this. And with industry consensus, it's super important. With that consensus, I think you can look at the short end of an FCC process, but even the short end of an FCC process is probably 2 years. And after that, assuming the Commission accepted our plan or something comparable to it, there would probably be another year or more of working the process out to get the retuning done. One thing I will point out at 900 is we have 60% of the licenses, and so those don't need to be addressed. And when you look at the other 40%, it's a smaller number. I mean, they're super important systems, but there's a smaller number than in some of the other rebandings that we've been involved with.
Okay. Wendell, question. In the West, many utilities have stayed with analog-based radio systems, MPT being a favorite, because of issues with digital coverage due to Fresnel distortion and multipath. Have you run into any of that in your experience?
Actually, yes, we have, but I could tell you they were swamped by the interference with an incumbent, well, I should say with Sprint Nextel, who basically share the same interleaf spectrum. Once we did the rebanding, and we also worked really very close with, at the time they were Nextel. Okay, I think our two departments almost operated as a single engineering department. We were able, through some spectrum transactions moves and a lot of moves on their part, to accommodate that. But what we found is this, okay? We found that deploying a sector site design in urban environments where we have a lot of buildings which give rise to a lot of multipath interference and multipath feeding, we were able to overcome a lot of the problems. Then the other interesting thing about moving to the IDEM technology is that they had multiple. I think it's at three antenna diversity on the receive end. So that, along with some of the technology that they had deployed internally, it did a lot to improve or to improve on the performance and to make the system a whole lot more resilient to multipath effects.
All right. Okay.
The other thing I would like to add to that is that the multipath also depends a lot on the quality of your front end. And what we realized is that on the mobile units that basically had a lot of real estate and had a really much higher quality filter, okay, a greater third order intercept point, we were able to communicate really very effectively in areas where we had experienced a lot of interference on the handsets, the portables.
Okay, all right. Morgan, you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. I wanted to say I think Wendell just brought up a super important point, and it's that there is no such thing as spectrum, particularly great spectrum, in which it's not a pretty crowded neighborhood, and it's always going to be such and worse. I mean, that's the only spectrum that's out there. So there's a lot of potential for interference, but when you approach it the correct way and have the right neighbors, as was the case with ConEd and Nextel over the years, there's a huge amount that can be done in terms of each side optimizing its frequency plan to minimize interference with the other. What I would like to point out about the proposal here at 900 is that really the only neighbors in that space are Pacific Data Vision, which has just bought into it, although I've been involved with this spectrum since the 80s when we started buying it for Nextel. But we're the 60% gorilla, but there's plenty of big gorillas on the UTC side too, and we can take a lot of theoretical interference and minimize it tremendously by just taking the right attitude towards the fact that we value each other's operations and we have to share this spectrum.
All right. Have another question from the audience. What are your, and I guess like Brett, if you could take this one, and Wendell, you might have some thoughts as well. What are your thoughts about 220 megahertz for utility communications, the 220 band?
Well, it's already spectrum that utility companies are operating in. It's certainly something that would, provide the kind of propagation characteristics that Morgan was just referring to. So it's definitely a candidate band for utility companies. And like I say, the MCLM decision actually involves spectrum that's at 217, 219. So, utility companies are definitely interested in trying to access spectrum in that frequency range.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what I could add there is when we started our SCADA system, we used exclusively 900 megahertz mass spectrum, but as we exhausted capacity on that, and we had commitments to make with respect to smart grid, we for the very first time used 220 megahertz. And what we found is that it performs really very well. The propagation, is at least an order of magnitude better than the 900 megahertz, particularly in our outer boroughs, so to speak, where the vegetation is more of an issue. But what we found is that because we could create a large reliable cell, so to speak, from a single cell site, we were able to reach a whole lot more endpoint assets. And because we were now able to reach a lot of endpoint assets, then what we had to do was to implement tighter control on the air interface on the logical layer, so that we were able to increase the capacity, the relative capacity between the two systems. So, for example, our 900 megahertz system could support traffic from 70 endpoints, and we found that we could support 140 endpoints on the 220 megahertz, but mainly as a function of the reach.
Okay. All right. Well, and we have another question. Morgan, I think this one's for you. Could you elaborate on how you plan to engage with FirstNet to share spectrum in your assets?
Let's see. Hopefully I didn't send anything that suggested that I had such an arrangement.
Oh.
But
you know what?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Maybe that was for Brad.
Brad. It was probably for Brad.
Yes. Yeah. Let me just make one point, because I think it's definitely worth thinking about. There's no way that any reasonable person wouldn't agree that in the worst of times, the public safety and the utilities and others like that need to all be on the same system. The question is priority access on that system. And the way I look at our proposal, we say on this limited amount of spectrum here at 900, critical infrastructure outranks public safety for critical infrastructure, for priority access on those channels. But I would expect that at some point, UTC are significant members and partners in build-out and whatever else with FirstNet. Just makes so much sense.
Okay.
But just to echo and emphasize the importance, I could tell you that during incidents where we depend on wireless communications, there is a huge impact on us. The fact that we come so low down on the totem pole on the FCC wireless priority access, and we've had wireless priority access devices that really didn't provide any benefit because of how low down we were on that priority list. So that's a huge consideration for utilities. It's something that they would definitely bring up with respect to participation in FirstNet.
All right. Brett?
Good.
How do you plan to engage? How do you see utilities engaging with FirstNet to share spectrum and assets? And I guess I'd take it one step further. If I'm a utility and I do want to pursue this, who do I talk to right now? Do I go to single points of contact, UTC, other utilities in my state? I guess how should a utility go about engaging so that they can talk with FirstNet about opportunities?
Right. Well, it's a very good question because, quite frankly, it hasn't been entirely clear. Right now, most utility companies are working through their state points of contact. FirstNet has been focused on engaging in the quote-unquote SLIGP process, the State and Local Implementation Grant Program process. So they're consulting with the states. And so as utility companies work with the states, then that information has been fed back to FirstNet. So that's one route. And now that FirstNet is starting to work through the end of that SLIGP process, they are also reaching out to utility companies directly. So there's an opportunity there, and the plan is to try and arrange some meetings with FirstNet for utility companies to talk to them directly. So that's another opportunity. And I think also the request for information that the that FirstNet put out presents another opportunity for utility companies to work directly with FirstNet.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see how all that actually shakes out.
Oh yeah.
Hey Donnie, can I throw in one more point?
Sure.
It's Morgan. I wouldn't, if I were a utility, I wouldn't ignore talking to my congressman, making sure that the congressman understands that the legislation made a mistake in not putting critical infrastructure at the same level of priority as FirstNet. Under circumstances that everybody would agree made sense. But when I talk to the folks at FirstNet, they seem to be operating on a concept of there's priority and then there's priority. And I think it's kind of in the nature of priority that priority access in particular, that you can't have several degrees of it. Because if you're not in the first level, there's a chance that you're preempted. And so I just don't know how you tolerate that.
Exactly. I think the priority preemption question, not only just within, not just with, say, utilities versus public safety, but within public safety. And I think I think that's going to be a big question, and within public safety, and in these situations that I think FirstNet spelled out in its public notice that, hey, there may be some times when even the public safety guys that normally would have priority don't, just because of the given circumstances of a particular event. I mean, if power line's down and you can't do any public safety until you get the power line fixed, then it would make sense that it's certainly arguable that the utilities should be the ones with priorities at that point. But anyway, let's see, other questions we have. Morgan, we've had a couple questions. Right now, you all haven't made any commitments in terms of what technology you would use either on the narrowband or the broadband side to this point, right?
That is correct. We're evaluating.
Okay, and then and Morgan, you guys have nationwide spectrum, but not necessarily looking to go nationwide overall. Or I guess how would you characterize it?
Okay, here's how I like to think of it. Through the transaction that we were lucky enough to do with Sprint, we do have a nationwide position, and generally that position is 200 channels or more, and so consistent with my theory that you have to earn a return for your investor, and on an asset as valuable as this, we're interested over time in deploying all that spectrum wherever and whenever we can.
All right. Another question for you. Mission critical push-to-talk standards are being discussed by FirstNet and 3GPP. Do you see this technology being used at 900 megahertz?
Oh yeah, the 900 megahertz that we have, which is the 896 to 901, 935 to 940, in parts of the world is part of LTE. It's in so-called Band 8. So while it wasn't anticipated to be used in the United States, that's in the grand scheme of things, it's a big but not insurmountable process to get it, and then it has to be incorporated into devices. But the important thing is that it will be in chipsets that are being developed for the global market because it's a so-called Band 8.
Okay. And another question from the audience, Wendell. Many utilities, the question reads, many utilities are seeing most of their communications being done on cellular telephones and off of company radios. Are you seeing that?
Yes, we are. In fact, one of the things I probably fail to elaborate on is that we depend heavily on the carriers to supplement communications, wireless communications. The thing is that we haven't made the leap yet to throw critical communications fully towards the carriers. What I would say is that I've observed that over the years there has been an improvement in the carrier's ability to maintain service during storms, because that there basically is my experience, and they did a lot better job in Sandy than they did in Irene, and a lot better job in Irene than the prior storms. So I think that they're making marginal steps towards improving on capacity, and I think the technology is driving that also. But I think that they need to take more targeted and committed action in terms of hardening sites, because our experiences, and a lot of our sites side by side with theirs, all right. A lot of the issues that either the sites went off air due to running out of battery power, or it was an issue with the single backhaul circuit that serviced the sites. In fact, after the blackout, the OEM had a meeting with ConEd, and they basically asked, based on what they had seen during the blackout, if we could be a provider of last resort. I don't think that went anywhere because the liabilities, were just too much for ConEd to stomach. But at least I see a marginal improvement over time.
Okay. Brett, what do you think on that? Are you seeing more reliance on cellular communications?
Yeah, there are some utility companies that are using cellular more so now than, say, 5 or more years ago. It's a reflection of the fact that utility companies are trying to support wider bandwidth applications. The cellular networks are already there and can support many applications that require those high bandwidth capacity. So it makes economic sense, and it's a practical solution in the near term for utility companies that have to meet their near term needs.
Okay. All right. And one final question for Morgan. How do you envision the development portion of your network, and what soft costs do you anticipate?
Well, to answer that, I have to know sort of the time frame, but let me just assume it probably means as we evolve towards broadband in the event that we're successful at the FCC. So let me take it to that. We raised sufficient capital not only to acquire the 900 megahertz spectrum, but also to deploy first phase dispatch operations up until the point that they start turning positive cash, and sufficient capital to develop to address the soft costs as we work with one or more vendors to develop an approach. As anybody familiar with the history of Nextel would expect, or actually familiar with the whole concept of two-way radio, we have worked with Motorola closely, and will continue to work with Motorola, looking at developing devices and applications in this space. And we are adequately funded to get that process started, but at such time as we got FCC approval and really started to think through the deployment of the network, we would be seeking additional capital.
Okay. All right. Well, we're out of time right now, but I'd like to thank each of our presenters, Wendell Little, Brett Kilbourne, and Morgan O'Brien, for their very informative presentations this afternoon. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Avtec, for making this event possible. And most of all, let me thank you, our audience, for your time and attendance this afternoon, and for all the great questions. We hope you found today's event valuable and informative. Have a productive remainder of your day, and we'll see you at the next IWC's Urgent Communications webinar.
Thanks, Donnie. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you.